Arthur, you with us?
Yes, I am. I am. And I just want to, hey, Arthur, nice to
Hey, how
see
are
you
you?
again.
Oh, I
Oh
see
my
your face
God.
again. Cool.
Yes,
I knew
nice
you
to
were
see.
on, but
Yeah, I didn't want to, disturb you while you were talking. So thank you for doing this on such short notice. For the rest of you, Arthur is on our board. And Arthur, our next meeting is on November 19th. So you'll get a
oh,
Zoom invite. Okay.
oh, okay. I'll write it down. Thank you for
Okay.
saying.
I'll send you one. So
Okay.
I'm really anxious to hear you talk about the topic. I know you've already done this before at another university. So, and then I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions. Some people might join in late, so please don't get offended by that.
No, I
Okay.
don't get it. Listen, I worked in the hotel business for a lot of years. I don't get that easily offended.
Good. Thick skin.
All right.
Well,
So I'm going to mute myself so I can hear you. All right. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Arthur, let's go ahead, and I'm going to introduce you to the whole group here. That
Okay.
you are the retired vice president of hotel support
And
at
operations, right?
Intercontinental Hotel Group in Atlanta,
Right.
and you're going to speak to us today about culture and service.
Right.
So please take the floor and go ahead.
Okay. Say, Chris, can I share my screen?
Ashi, our
Yeah.
info.
Arthur, you can do that.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to share I just want to make sure I had,
I already did it earlier.
I wanted to make sure I had the
Sharing
right
that.
to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
okay, let me just play from the beginning. So again, are you guys okay if I go ahead and get started?
Yes, sir. Go right ahead, please.
All right. So, what I did was, and of course I have talked about many of these items, in the past, but I thought about, what did I want to really focus in here? And one of the things I wanted to do was, Chris had said to me, take about an hour, et cetera. And I always like these things to be somewhat interactive. And so I don't want to speak for the entire hour. So I thought, I'll probably speak for about 35, 40 minutes, but then allow time at the end for discussion, because typically on these, you get lots of questions from folks about, how are hotels responding to COVID? How are hotels responding to this? I mean, there's 1,000 questions, and very honestly, topics such as service culture, operations, et cetera. I mean, they're such big topics. I mean, literally, we could talk for 3 days about them, right? And so, I want to make sure, Radesh, for you and for Christopher and for the rest of the folks on the call, that this has meaning to you, and that I cover things that are, really relevant for what, you would like to, kind of hear and go through. And so, I hope that's okay. So I'm giving an overview of these things. That's probably, the key on here is that there are a lot of things you could really deep dive down into, which I will be happy to do more if we have time at the end. But this is really an overview of kind of what my view of the linkage between these things. So you can see up here what I did was, this is kind of my view of how, brands and service culture and operations are all interrelated. One of the biggest probably challenges, if you will, I had in corporate America was always making executives, and for 30 years, or 35 years, whatever it was, I don't even remember anymore, but for at least 20 years, I was a vice president of operations within IHG, one of the largest global hotel companies in the world. And I also led teams in my last few years there that really supported every hotel around the world, almost 5,700 when I left, and primarily 4,300 hotels that were managed and franchised in the Americas. And I led a multitude of teams crossing everything from daily support, call centers with people calling in for questions around standards, to people and departments that supported hotels. At one point, quality was reporting to me. But the nice thing about that role was that I got to interact with essentially every senior department and senior executive within the entire organization and globally. We established procedures for how hotels were brought on board. We opened almost 300 hotels in teams that I led per year in our openings team, which reported to me for a couple of years within the Americas. So the nice thing was I really had the opportunity and privilege to interface with lots of different departments to help them, what I call, connect the dots on how all of these functions have to interrelate, that no department can work in isolation. And so, kind of as a placeholder here, the philosophy of service that you have in a hotel, the culture that you create in a hotel, and the service delivery or how you execute it on a daily basis are really all related, right? They're all three sides of the same object because they have to exist in conjunction with each other rather. I mean, if you don't look at all of these things in unison, your service delivery, what the guest feels, is not going to really work. So when I talk about, your brand is your life, when I talk to a lot of students, what I think is important is that the type of person we are is really the type of branding we are. Just like a hotel company or a brand has certain things that come to mind, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. We as people have our own branding, right? When people say our names, certain things come to mind. Service and sales, and I'll talk about that, are really so interrelated. One of the nice things was I actually started my career in the hotel business in sales and marketing. I was a sales guy for a number of years. I was a VP of sales in the organization a number of years ago. And why that's so important is that when you see that sales is what sells really the attributes of the hotels for group meetings, for transient sales, et cetera, the bottom line is they're really selling brands and they're selling culture and they're selling service delivery. That is what they're selling. Yes, they are selling themselves or their own brand, but more importantly, they're selling what does that hotel and that brand represent to that customer and why do I want to do business with you? And all of that really kind of revolves into what is a long-term brand. And I remember when I was in my past jobs, we used to talk about how the sustainability of brands really has to kind of, weather all things, right? I mean, every brand has certain ups and downs, and certain brands and hotels are going to have bad days and good days, and you're not going to satisfy 100% of your customers. But when you have strong brands and strong branding, delivered through good service, people will allow you to have occasional mistakes. Now, if you do it all the time, you're going to have a problem with your brand, and we're going to come back and talk about that a little bit later. To me, culture, I don't think there was anything more important to me than culture. I will be very honest. When I left IHG, I had one of the highest engagement scores of my large team, ran over 93% engagement for the company. Okay, me personally in my department. And I led a team, a huge team of about 150 people. And that was a large team within our corporate headquarters with a lot of different moving parts. But part of the reason I did that was because a great service culture and mentality of the employees is going to help you in delivering the other side of this, which is what is the service delivery. We're going to talk a little bit later about strategy versus culture and those two concepts. And then we will talk about within service delivery a little bit around people engagement, how important people are. I know that many of you on this call have heard me say repeatedly over the years that, people really matter, especially in our business. We are a hospitality business. It doesn't mean that we don't have standards and written procedures and performance reviews and all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line is that we are a people-centered business, right? Technology is there to support us, not the other way around. And I used to say that repeatedly to folks within our IT departments to say, look, the technology has to be wonderful. I got it. But people want to still interact with people, right? Reactive versus proactive service, and then long-term versus short-term relationships where you really develop a culture and a service delivery that doesn't make people have to stay with you. They stay with you not because they have to, they stay with you because they want to. That's the key difference here. So let me get into a little bit of this under, philosophy of service. Sales and service, in my opinion, I guess as an old sales guy, I used to say this to the sales department. I used to say, we used to have a joke in sales, which was, sales sold the dream and then operations had to service the nightmare. And that's a bad salesperson when they overpromise and underdeliver and say, no problem, we can take care of anything that you say. And if you want to check into the hotel at 10 o'clock in the morning, no problem. well, gee, I'm sorry, it's Sunday on a big resort holiday weekend, and there's no way the entire group is going to get in at 10 o'clock in the morning. So, being upfront with customers and delivering the right service expectations is what good salespeople understand. And they don't overpromise, but they explain the reasons behind why you can't necessarily check 100 people in at 10 o'clock in the morning, and what options are there to deliver for that group, right? Pre-checking you, having a separate meeting room set up to store your luggage, whatever, okay? But, and the list of that could go on for, 1,000 bullet points. We're on stage every day. I mean, I remember when I was in different locations, including in Florida, where I interacted with, Disney organization for a while, et cetera. We are on stage every single day, right? I mean, when we go out and we're in front of a customer, they don't care that we had a problem with the family in the morning, that we had a rough ride to work. They don't care. We are on stage. We are reflective of that hotel, the service culture, and that's all that matters to a customer. Doesn't mean they don't have empathy for us as people, but it's really not their problem, right? And so we have to kind of leave that stuff behind. Service is a contact sport. I always talked about how, relationships matter. And, I can't tell you how much over the years, whether I was running a 500 room hotel or running a huge divisions within IHG as a VP of operations, I mean, service is a contact sport, right? And how we interact with our customers and deliver, it really reflects what do they say to their friends, their family, their relatives when they go home about us, right? Because there's no amount of advertising in the world. And of course, the brand people that I used to deal with didn't always like it. When I said this, I said, listen, I don't care how many millions you spend on branding. If we can't deliver it at the Bellman and Maid level at a hotel, then your brand doesn't exist. Because the execution of brands is at the unit level. It's not at a corporate office level. And this is why I pushed human resources and various other departments to spend so much time on training and interaction and educating and making sure that people really understood the philosophy of service in the company or in the hotel, because I can't do their job for them, right? Everybody does their job for their reasons. They don't do it for my reasons. There has to be a compelling reason to them for why they're going to do it. And we use data and we value feedback. I used to have a saying that, at times it felt like in corporate America, we never saw a PowerPoint we didn't like. And I used to say, when somebody would come in, and I mean this literally, would come into my office with a 100-page PowerPoint deck, I used to say, wait a second, okay? First of all, on the first slide, tell me why I'm looking at this. Okay, what's the end goal here? Start with the end in mind. I mean, it's kind of like a lawyer when you go into an opening session in a courtroom, right? They don't deliver every single fact and figure and what occurred with whoever's on trial. They say, look, I'm here to prove to you today that so-and-so is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and I'm going to do it by showing you this, this, and this. Thank you very much. And they sit down. So at least while you're looking at, thousands of data points, et cetera, and PowerPoints, you understand, okay, what is the end game that somebody's trying to prove to us? A philosophy of service is really around starting with the end in mind, right? What do we want our service culture to be? What do we want our employees to represent? And there's 1,000 things that go into this, from employee handbooks and training, et cetera, which we'll talk about. But, this is why, I think this is so important. And of course, the brand is really our life. I mean, we represent, the brand. And, like I said, I mean, the customer doesn't care that we had issues or whatever. They know the brand through our eyes. I do think at times, this might be a little controversial, but I've often said that people remember bad service at times more than they remember good service. I mean, I know I go into a hotel, or when I call an airline, or I check in, or a restaurant, I don't expect to have bad service. I mean, I'm pretty disappointed if I have lousy service in a restaurant or a hotel, because I expect them to be trained at a certain nominal level, right? I don't expect a Ritz-Carlton a Holiday Inn Express or a Hampton Inn to deliver the same levels of service as, say, a Ritz-Carlton. I don't have the same expectations, but I do expect the employees to be trained. I expect them to be polite. I expect them to not be robots reading off of some manual. I mean, those are basic expectations, right? And so half the battle with service is meeting the expectation and the brands setting the correct expectations in the first place, right? So we're not over promising and under delivering. And good service delivery is fragile. I mean, it only takes a few problems, but a lot of times, you know, we spent a lot of time in corporate America and in hotels talking about service recovery, right? Every hotel has problems, right? There's not a hotel in the universe, I don't care who they are, that doesn't have service problems. It's all about how the employees are trained to handle it. How do they respond? Okay. And if their cheeseburger was 5 minutes late, we don't comp their whole stay. Okay. There's also parameters that have to be established with our employees. So I used to say in the hotel industry, you know, the punishment has to fit the crime, right? But, you know, if somebody's really had a lousy stay and we want to empower our employees, we have to give our employees the latitude to do what's right. And we'll come back and talk about that a little bit more. Because brands are so integrated with our service culture and operations, I mean, what do we do in operations? We deliver the brand promise, right? I can't tell you how many meetings I sat in where for, you know, 20 years, we talked about the brand promise. What is the brand promise? Well, the brands aren't the ones delivering the promise. It's the operator like me that was delivering the promise, right? So the brands create these promises, kind of like a salesperson, but operations and our employees at a line level have to deliver that promise. And if they don't, your brand promise doesn't mean a thing. So when you look at these brands, I mean, different things come to mind. Obviously, you've got Nike, you've got Volvo, FedEx, United. And the reason I use these is because when you think about it, and I could have used many other brands as well, but you know, you think about Nike with their saying that it used to be just do it, et cetera. Volvo, people tend to think about safety, et cetera, because for years they were really reliable, et cetera, and very safe cars. FedEx for overnight delivery. United used to have their logo was the friendly skies. And the reason that I put this up on here is that when you have brands delivered at a line level employee, it only takes one or two instances to really tear down your entire brand that you spent millions of dollars developing. A couple of years ago, some of you may remember, they dragged a passenger off of a United flight. Okay, and so United that had spent, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing and advertising and commercials was all over the news because of this, with videos for like months, lawsuits, because a couple of employees didn't handle a passenger correctly, and they became a poster child for what not to do. And so all of that work of training, et cetera, came down to a couple of minutes, 10, 15 minutes on one plane that really affected an airline. It just shows you how fragile, you know, things are, you know, can be. When I say that you have a brand, I mean, I really talk about when I talk to, you know, when I used to talk to employees, or when I'm talking to all of you folks on the phone, you know, students, the rising stars at the University of Memphis, you know, I want you to think about what your brand is, because eventually when you go out and you're working in corporate America, you still have your own brand, right? You don't become the brand of whatever organization or hotel you work for. You have values that are reflective of you, right? And I've never met a bad employee. I mean, I got to be honest with you. I've led thousands of employees in my career. I've never really met a bad employee. What I have met are a lot of bad managers. What I have met are a ton of not good leaders. What I have met is a lot of lack of training. So a lot of it, I used to say, listen, if we take employees under our arm and we're training them, it's our obligation and responsibility to train, motivate, reward them correctly so they understand how they fit into the brand mission. They understand how they fit into the vision of that organization, the company. And if we haven't done that, then the organization hasn't done its job. It's not the employee's fault, it's the organization's fault. But as you go out and you're thinking about the types of organizations that you want to join, your brand has to meld well with the brand or the company that you're going to work with. So just as we did on the brands that we just saw, Volvo, Nike, et cetera, I mean, certain images pop in your mind when I say the word Volvo or Mercedes-Benz or whatever, or Apple. You know, when somebody says your name, what images or what names, what words come to mind? And this is just something, for people to think about, because we represent our own brand, which then fits in and affects operations. The service culture, I've always believed that if you service your employees really well, they'll service your guests well. I mean, there's that old cycle, and Radesh, I'm sure you guys have heard this thousands of times. I mean, it's a cycle, right? I mean, you bring guests in. We spent a lot of time merchandising and marketing and trying to sell to them, and millions and billions of dollars. They get into a hotel, and the service delivery has to occur at the unit level between an hourly front desk clerk and a guest who only knows they're there because they booked it online or they booked on the company website. What they think of that brand and that service culture is all dependent on that 10-minute interaction with the front desk clerk. So we literally come down. I used to, as I said, I used to say to our most senior executives, and I was one of them, I used to say, you know what, the business that we're in comes down to desk clerks and people at that really level who interact with people. And so the role of our good leaders in creating this service culture is developing a culture where the employees understand how important it is for them to treat guests well. And we'll talk about the employee side, because how we treat our employees has a direct impact on how they're going to treat our guests. I know that's not a shock to anybody, but a lot of hotels just don't get that. There's an old saying that when strategy meets culture, culture wins, okay? I've gone through a lot of corporate reorgs over the years and buying brands and buying hotel companies, and you have to integrate our culture with their culture. And very honestly, you can have the best PowerPoints and the best strategies on PowerPoints in the world, but if the culture doesn't allow you to change that organization, you have a different problem, right? So Jack Welch of General Electric wrote some phenomenal books that I love reading, and I've actually heard him speak in person in the past, and he talked a lot about culture. And when he ran General Electric with the kind of incredible organization that it was back then, the culture of the organization and the strategy was something that he really spent a lot of time talking about. And I would urge anybody to check up on him. I always said that culture is created by people, not despite people. I will honestly say, and I know probably some of you have heard me say this when I've addressed, groups in the past, including yours, is that, when I was in my 20s, late 20s, et cetera, I used to think, well, things would be really great if I could just get these employees, not have to deal with these employees all the time, and then you start to realize that without the employees, you cannot create a service culture, right? And that's an example of someone who wasn't a very good leader. And when I started in this industry, I wasn't a very good leader, but it wasn't because I didn't want to be a good leader. Very bluntly, I didn't know how to be a good leader. No one had ever sat down and said, look, this is what leadership looks like. So people tended to just model whoever was the closest person around. Unfortunately, that's not always the way you want to do it, right? The closest person that's around you might be an autocrat or somebody that thinks that yelling at employees is okay. Well, it isn't. And so, over the years, you learn those types of things. Stu Leonard's and his culture, he ran a phenomenal, I don't even know if it's still there, I need to look that up, but he ran a phenomenal grocery store up in Norwalk, Connecticut, which was one of the most successful, it was the most successful grocery store in the world. They had a big granite rock in front of the store. I used to drive there 50 miles every week from New York City to Norwalk, Connecticut to do my grocery shopping, because their service culture was so phenomenal. And we used parts of it in hotels that I was operating up in the New York area at that point. The big granite rock said, rule number 1, if the customer is ever wrong, read rule number 2. And then rule number 2 says, if the customer is ever wrong, reread rule number 1. Does that make sense? And so rule number 1 is the customer's always right. I kind of messed that up. Rule number 2 is if the customer's ever wrong, reread rule number 1. Sorry for messing that up. Teams and people create cultures. Corporate America doesn't create cultures. People create cultures. Cultures are created and are cultivated every single day. Okay. When I ran, teams in sales and marketing, 20, 30 people just at a hotel level, what I had to do was to make sure that every single day every employee within that organization understood the service culture. Every single day, the culture was reinforced. Every single day, we're coaching and counseling and communicating and rewarding our employees every single day, okay? Not once a year, not twice a year, not once a month, every single day. And every leader or manager under me had to understand how to coach, how to implement that as well. So one of the things I say on here, can employees easily describe your culture, right? I mean, if an employee in an organization can't describe the service culture of the brand or the hotel, then you probably have a problem, right? Because if people can't describe it, they're not going to deliver it. It's very simple, right? So we're not going to today write a mission statement for a hotel or describe what the service culture is of a particular hotel, but every hotel should have a written service culture, mission statement, what they want to represent to their employees, to their customers, to their owners, to their key stakeholders, right? And those things you're not going to find those things in a standards manual of a hotel company. I mean, trust me, I've been through and been involved in writing dozens of standards manuals for every brand in organizations. Standards manuals are designed about what soap goes into a room, right? And yes, there's service delivery, but the real intricate details of what goes on really occurs at the hotel level, but how it's implemented. I love this quote by Steve Jobs, of formerly of Apple, as you all know. He said, "My model for business is the Beatles. They were four guys who kept each other's tendencies in check. They balanced each other, and the total was greater than the sum of the parts. That's how I see business. Great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people." And the reason that I put this up there and why this was so important to me is that, being a guy that led very, very diverse teams in terms of, groups that we serviced and many different working structures, and it wasn't a big department where everybody was doing the same thing. It was, multiple departments within a department, right? So running a division as I did, you get exposed to a lot of different things, but then you have to make it, it's like being an orchestra conductor is how I described it. And for some of you know, I'm a musician. I play the violin when I'm not working in the hotel business. So as a musician, I've learned it's like a orchestra conductor. As the leader or the conductor, you're not required to play every single instrument in the orchestra. You are required to make sure they understand how they're going to play together, right? I'm not required as a conductor to play the clarinet, the violin, the cello, and the bassoon, but I need to understand them, and I need to understand how they fit into that piece of music. That's the same thing in business. But what I love about this quote from Steve Jobs is that you'd never want to get into what I call kind of a collective mind think, where you get 5 people in a room who all think the very same way, and they all go, "Oh yeah, that sounds great to me." Well, guess what? The problem is you all think the same way, so what did you think the outcome was going to be? And diversity and people thinking differently is what made great hotel companies. New brands came about because of people sitting around a table, brainstorming on a flip chart or a whiteboard on what do we want to accomplish, what kind of brands do we want to have out there with our people. So I was lucky in my career to be involved in the launches of a lot of new brands, for my old organization, et cetera, which was a lot of fun because you kind of had a clean slate in which to operate, right? So that was a lot of fun. These were things that I had on my ops wall when I was in my past jobs, as a VP of ops, focusing on the basics. We're not an overly complicated business, the hotel business. We can make it very complicated. And there are elements of it that do get complicated, running projections, reading P&Ls. There's more complication, I get it. But in terms of service basics here, it's kind of like in banquets, right? The hot food needs to be hot and the cold food needs to be cold, okay? It's really not that complicated. Now, there's a lot of iterations of how you get there, but if you can satisfy the basics and make sure that employees and we as employees understand those basics, then a lot of other things are going to fall in place because they're going to have to satisfy the basics first before they even get to the second point. Monitor actions to results. And I used to love telling strategy people this. I used to say, listen, you can have the greatest strategies and PowerPoints in the world, but guess what? If you can't get it executed, your strategy and PowerPoint doesn't mean a thing. Okay, so execution is at the hotel level. Execution is really about how people deliver service on a daily basis, how they're trained, how they're motivated, etc. Keeping it simple. I used to use a lot of examples that sometimes weren't even examples from the hotel business, because sometimes, you know, when you talk to people about the hotel business, immediately they start thinking about the application within our industry, when in fact, the business is actually simple enough that if you pull people out of that, they start to think it a little bit more clearly, and you go, well, you know, if you were in an airline, would you want to stand in line at the counter for 30 or 45 minutes to check in to get your ticket? The answer is no. So why would you want to do that in a hotel? Then you don't get all the excuses for why. Well, you have to understand our system does this, and we have to pre-check, and we have to do this, and we have to ask for ID and all the other stuff. I got it, but there has to be a way to keep it simple, because that's really what's going to resonate eventually to the guests. And you need alignment to support communication. I used to have a saying, which some of you heard, which is, if you don't have clarity, you're going to have confusion and conflict. Let me just say that again. If you don't have clarity, you're going to have confusion and conflict. If the members of a team don't know how they fit in and exactly what they're going to do or supposed to do, you're going to have conflict, right? If you have a football team and the quarterback doesn't understand what his role is, then you're going to have a problem, right? Because you're going to have people tripping over each other. Keeping the end goal in mind is kind of what we started talking about with PowerPoints, et cetera. You know, why are we here? We're here to deliver great service at a unit level. We're here to deliver a service promise, whatever that promise is, okay? And that varies with 1,000 iterations depending on the brand or the hotel that you happen to be in, or even the specific function within a hotel, whether you're a housekeeper or a maintenance person, it doesn't matter. Every department has a goal, and every department has a function, just like every member of an orchestra has a function within an orchestra, right? I never expected the clarinet to go pick up and play the trombone. And I used to say that a lot in corporate America. Everybody needs to do their role and do it really well, because then all the pieces fit together well. And then you've got a good fine-tuned organization where people aren't tripping over each other. Use data. We get a lot of data in corporate America. I mean, tons of data. I mean, millions and millions of data points and presentations and analyses of data. And, you know, the key on all the data stuff is really, how do you distill it down to, what does this really mean about how we're delivering service? What does it really mean about how we're delivering our culture? Are we doing it or are we not, right? Now, we can identify all day a lot of data points, but the data needs to support us, not the other way around. I used to tell people, I mean, the data is there for my benefit, not the other way around, right? Data supports my actions. So, and all hotels matter. I mean, that was more from a corporate office level, because when you have, you know, thousands of hotels, you know, just like if you have 5 children, you don't abandon or ignore any one of your 5 children. But you also realize that one of your children may need more help in math. Now, that doesn't mean that they all need more help in math. So the fact of the matter is that all children matter, just like all hotels matter, all employees matter, but you need to make sure that you're delivering to what each individual needs and focus on their particular needs, not just kind of broad stroke that everybody is the same in terms of, you know, their needs, in terms of hotels in particular. And learn from the past to adjust the future. In other words, there's a tendency, and I, you know, as a guy who spent a lot of years, you know, in the same organization, you know, sometimes you would see somebody come out with something and you'd go, yeah, but, you know, I know you weren't here 10 years ago, but, you know, we actually did that. And you might want to go and pull that document to see what you can learn from it, because what you just presented isn't new or different. Now, maybe it wasn't executed in the past, but at least you ought to have the benefit of knowing why it didn't work 5 or 10 years ago, right? And sometimes when you have new players, they don't know that stuff. They just come in, they want to prove and validate themselves, and that's normal human nature. And they don't always look, you know, at the past and challenge the status quo. I mean, it's like, you know, I used to believe that, you know, the word why was very important in our language. Why are we doing this? I mean, is it satisfying the basic needs that we have? Is it helping us deliver on our service promise? Is it helping us, improve employee morale and well-being? I mean, if it's not, then I would say, then why are we doing it, right? It has to pass a kind of a litmus test of sorts, before we should spend, a ton of time, really doing that. These are 5 A's. I'm just going to go through real quickly because I want to make sure I allow time for you guys in the end. But the 5 A's are really, when you talk about a service culture, and I'm talking about it at an employee level and a manager level and a leader level, attitude, being authentic, being accessible, being approachable, being accountable, right? Okay, so, I used to have a friend of mine in IHG that said, you don't lie to the troops, right? The general that sits in the Pentagon isn't on the battleground. They don't always know what's going on. They're sitting in an office in the Pentagon. The troops know what's going on. The troops will talk to each other, and they know whether or not the culture is really working or not. So having a great attitude, a leader who is accessible, that people can look at, et cetera, and believe that they can actually have a conversation with them, being approachable. A lot of leaders that I work with used to say, hey, I have an open door policy. And I used to laugh because I go, well, having an open door policy has nothing to do with whether or not you have a door or not. It has to do with whether or not people feel that they can come and they can talk to you about a topic that's important to them. Not a topic that's important to you as a leader, but a topic that's important to them as an employee. And are we accountable? And accountable means accountable to our guests, accountable to each other, accountable to our owners, the brands, our stakeholders, right? We are expected to be, accountable. And authentic is really important because, we're not robots, right? So we need to be authentic when we're delivering service and not make it sound like it's coming through some guidebook or some standards manual or some training script, because just like I said with the general and the troops, our guests know whether or not our service delivery is, right or not. Culture and philosophy, therefore, when I talk about service, and you see how I kind of intertwine all of this, the culture and philosophy of an organization supports the service delivery, right? It's either going to validate, support, or invalidate or not support the service delivery. If you don't have the right culture, you don't have the right philosophy, I don't care how hard you try on a daily level as an employee, the service delivery is not going to occur. There's an old saying, people will forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made that feel. The same thing applies for guests, right? When we check them in, how we respond to them says the world about whether or not they believe we care about them, their needs. And sensing that, and that kind of sixth sense that employees have to have around, did somebody just get off a plane and they're all frazzled because their plane was 3 hours late, and they've got a young kid, that they've got in tow, and they want somebody that's a little bit more understanding about the fact that they don't want to stand in line for 20 minutes with a kid when they're tired and they're hungry, et cetera, et cetera. Do employees share in the long-term vision? Well, as we said before, if they don't know what the vision is of service delivery, they're not going to execute anything. They're just going to vacillate back to whatever their particular view is. And then they're going to turn to you and say, well, the manual said do this. Yeah, but the manual doesn't have a tape recording of exactly how you engage with every person, right? We don't have a manual that tells us how we engage with somebody when we walk down the street or go into a restaurant. We know those things because each one of us has our own brand values and our own values of how we believe we should treat people, right? And that's a very personal thing. Reactive versus proactive service is really about feedback being a gift, right? I mean, I used to have a CEO in Atlanta, Kirk Kinsell, that used to say feedback is a gift. I never forgot that for years when he used to say that to people. If people don't ask for feedback, they're not going to get it. And sometimes they don't ask because they don't want it, because they don't want to know what the answer is. And that's not going to develop good service delivery. Good service delivery is not going, well, nobody complained. No, that's just service delivery where you don't know what anybody's thinking. Good service delivery is a general manager and staff that are continually talking to guests, walking around a hotel, reinforcing daily that service culture, and interacting with culture with the employees and the guests to validate whether or not they are in fact having a good day, okay? I used to say, I don't send my wife a survey in December and say how I'm doing. I mean, I see her every day. If I don't know, there's a pretty serious problem. The same thing works with employees, the same thing works with guests, right? And how do we know, and how do leaders know if the staff is engaged? Well, try talking to them. Try walking around. Try getting up out of your office. We used to call it management by walking around. Don't sit in your office all day looking at PowerPoints. Get out and talk to your staff who are on the front line and delivering, because then you'll find out what's really going on from the troops. I love this quote from Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. I don't worry about robots becoming more like people. I worry about people becoming more like robots. And again, we talked about this a little bit under service delivery, right? Which is we don't want to interact with somebody at a front desk or in housekeeping or in a call center that sounds like they're reading off of some script, right? I mean, by the way, I got that. I understand that they have to have some scripting in place. That's normal. But just like you have a piece of music that a performer might play, everybody has a little bit of interpretation, and they deliver it in a natural way. They deliver it in an authentic way so that the guest feels like it's not just scripted. I don't know a guest in the world that wants to interact with somebody that doesn't really interface with them like a human being on a personal level in a hotel, in a service delivery, right? It's why we go to restaurants, right? It's not just for the food. It's an experience. We go there because we like the waiters, or we like this waiter, or they're nice at the hostess stand. But, you know, there's a lot of places where we can get a good cheeseburger. But we go back to certain places because the cheeseburger is great, but we also like the people that work there, because they're not just robots, you know, delivering cheeseburger and reading off of some, you know, some script. So I love that quote. And then what's 1/100th of a second? I know that that seems like, I mean, moving with speed and service cultures. I mean, you know, I used to say to people, you know, everything's great in the hotel business, and, you know, brands and sometimes IT people and other departments within hotels and within corporate America, you know, they understand this, but they don't always have the same sense of urgency, with all due respect, that an operator does, people running hotels and divisions that support hotels, because they don't have a customer standing in front of them at 6 o'clock at night going, how come I can't check in now? Because your system is down. When you have to deal with that, then you realize that moving with speed is important in our industry, and the best ideas in the world still have to be executed with a certain amount of good speed and good diligence, et cetera. So 1/100th of a second, we know that's pretty fast. And I use this when I talk to Michael Phelps in the 2008 Olympics. When he won his 7th gold medal, that's what he won by, which I always thought was pretty amazing. And if you ever saw that race, and I know you can probably YouTube it or video it, I mean, what he did was, you know, he was actually trailing and he never gave up. And he literally won by 1/100th of a second. And I always said to people, listen, you know, I used to tell my staff there's 12 months in a year, okay? So I don't care if after 9 months we're struggling somewhat against budget or our service metrics still need work. There's 12 months in a year, okay? Don't tell, I already know, it's common sense to me that 9 months are behind us. What's more important to me is, what do we plan to do in the next 3 months to deliver on the service that we said we were going to deliver? What steps and actions are we going to take in order to deliver that? Because if you just give up and go, well, it's not possible, then you wouldn't be like Michael Phelps, who won his 7th gold medal. I just always thought that was a pretty, I just saw this race and I always thought it was pretty amazing. But I think there's some good learning out of this on how, you know, sometimes, you know, winning is just keeping your foot on the pedal and not giving up until you absolutely can't. And then even if you don't make that goal, you're still going to be in great shape, right? The silver medal wouldn't have been so bad for Michael Phelps, with all due respect. I know it wouldn't have been the gold medal, but it would have been a pretty good seventh medal for this guy. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over. Chris, if it's okay with you and everybody, can we kind of have some discussion, or are there questions that I can answer? Because I said I wanted to allow some of that, you know, here. So I'm sure there's always going to be questions on, you know, how are hotels responding to COVID now, and what do you see as challenges? But I mean, you tell me kind of what you guys would like to talk about.
Yeah, Arthur, we're ready for questions. I'll let Ashi unmute everybody,
Okay.
and we'll let people jump in. Who's
Sure.
first? Who's first for Arthur?
Well, I'll go for Arthur. I I always see that students are a bit shy, so we need to warm them up. Arthur, you were there. This is related to the culture. That was an outstanding presentation, and I really know exactly what you're saying. But with the Kimpton brand, that IHG project, you were around when that was acquired, right?
Yes.
So, and that company is historically, it's been a different sort of a rebellious brand that went against the culture in the industry. How did that merger come about? Was there a process that you all follow to make sure that I mean, they're still successful within IHG.
Yeah. Oh.
So,
Now that's a great question. And I don't want to. One thing I don't want to do is violate any confidentiality issues with IHG. But I can tell you that the culture of Kimpton was something that we were very careful when I was there to try to protect and value. Okay. And I sat in some of the most senior leadership meetings in the company, 100 people globally. Being a VP at IHG was a senior leadership position because it's a $12 billion+ organization. So when I would go to those meetings, you're sitting with the most senior people, the CEO, the presidents of every region, including, the guy that was running Kimpton, who I know pretty well. And my old HR VP went to become the senior VP for Kimpton Hotels, and she was great and loved her, and I still talk to her. But what was important when Kimpton was purchased, the assets, as you know, weren't all purchased by IHG, meaning the real estate. The real estate was owned by whoever owned it. So what IHG really bought was the management, the name, the license, et cetera, just like what we did, years ago with other brands. What was important was, the Hotel Indigo was a boutique brand, had done very, very well. I think there's over 100 Indigos now. I opened the flagship Indigo years ago out in San Diego, so I was heavily involved, with that brand. I actually managed a number of them directly as a VP. When we bought Kimpton, Kimpton runs incredible numbers, incredible occupancies. I mean, mid to high 80s, incredible ADRs. I mean, a culture that is one of the highest rated in the company. But let's also remember that when we had them, they were about 65 hotels, right? So 65 hotels, I think what they did was they really had they have a great organization, and they were able to manage it because it was small enough that they almost operated like an independent business unit. And that was very important to the company to make sure, meaning IHG, that we leveraged their value as a brand and as a reputation, right? Because they had an incredible brand reputation, very, very loyal customers. And so what I used to say to people is, have you guys ever watched Star Trek when you had the Borg? And the Borg would assimilate people and they would all become like the Borg or whatever. I used to say, we're not trying to make the Kimpton employees like the Borg, okay? We want Kimpton to be what Kimpton is, right? They wanted Kimpton to leverage the value of IHG for the benefit of Kimpton, to learn some things from Kimpton. Kimpton has a phenomenal food and beverage operation that I think any of our brands could benefit from. And part of it is because within Kimpton, the food and beverage department actually reports separately to the corporate office level. They don't report up through the general manager. And in many of the hotels, and I've been to a number of them, the restaurant almost looks like a freestanding restaurant. And they do really, really nice work, because you could be in a Kimpton restaurant, and I have been, and you don't even know that you're in a hotel. It's like a freestanding restaurant. It's merchandised and marketed and presents itself, a separate entrance from the street. And so they really did very, very, really excellent work at a very, very high-end luxury level. And so, I think Kimpton allowed IHG to grow that brand internationally. And I know a number of them are in development or have been opened around the world. But we also wanted to make sure that we didn't kind of destroy what Kimpton was, right? In other words, it's hard to retain the fabric of what they were while at the same time telling people, well, now you're an employee of IHG, but you're also an employee of Kimpton, because they are an IHG employee, right? They're not just a Kimpton employee, right? And so that takes some maneuvering and that takes work. And it also takes a lot of time on senior executives' part to explain the value. And also IHG is a huge company, so they can leverage their human resources abilities at a far greater level than a company of 65 hotels, right? Despite the fact that they do really, really good work. So I think it made sense on a lot of different levels. So hope that answered that question.
Who's up next? Who's next? Arthur, the students have prepared some questions, so
Okay, sure.
this isn't, we're not blindsiding them here.
Sure, no problem.
So those of you that have some questions, now's your time to ask Arthur.
Okay. Did you all prepare a question?
They all
You know,
have,
I love talking to Arthur, so if you guys don't have anything, I have plenty. Arthur knows he and I can go hours on this.
It's okay. It's okay. Look, I get how this works. I mean, I got it.
Anybody really? Any of the students? I don't want to monopolize the time, but
well, Radesh, my students do have questions, but
are they not able to unmute, Ashik?
Yeah, they all look like they're muted.
They can unmute it themselves. I just give that
Oh.
options. I don't need to give them.
Okay.
This is
Well,
not mine.
okay. While we're working on that, Arthur, you saw the AHLA report come out just a few days, a couple of weeks ago, saying that 2/3 of the hotels will file for bankruptcy in the next 6 months. So I was intrigued by the comment you made earlier in the presentation. So which type of properties are actually doing well, and why was that report just aimed at pressuring the government into giving some funding, or
Yeah,
is it?
yeah, and I have to apologize. Being a retired guy now, I'm on all these boards and et cetera, and playing music, but I actually haven't read those type
Okay.
of reports. I didn't actually know that.
Okay.
I'm a little surprised they say 2/3 because that seems a little severe. I know that
38,000 hotels. They say 38,000 hotels will file for bankruptcy and close in the next 6 months unless they get funding from the federal government. That is exactly what their report said.
yeah.
It was shocking. So I was wondering if this is a good opportunity for new ownership to come in with low debt if so many hotels are going out of business.
Yeah, I mean, I from what I understand, I mean, look, and I've talked to, friends of mine in the industry, at other hotel companies, IHG, Hilton, et cetera. And, I do understand that, corporate America hotels are impacted because their revenue stream directly comes from the franchise fees of the hotels that are out there, right? Obviously. But I mean, there are brands out there, like, for example, I know for a fact that many extended stay hotels are doing very well. I mean, there are thousands of extended stay type hotels out there, whether they're, Candlewood, Staybridges, Residence Inn, Homewood Suites, et cetera. And part of that is because when people are concerned about social distancing and COVID-19, being able to have your own kitchen and not have to go sit in a restaurant has a big value. And so I've read lots of commentary from, colleagues, at the past, et cetera, that divisions were doing very, very well, et cetera. I know that some companies are doing better. I mean, now I'm speaking about corporate America, corporate ownership, corporate franchise type companies, because if they don't have a lot of, own a lot of hotels. Now, I mean, I think that that part of that could be posturing too, right? Because I mean, that, the debt is going to keep coming in unless they can refinance with their banks, right? And so I can't tell you how many owners over the years I've dealt with where they're trying to refinance their debt, et cetera. I mean, I don't think the banks want a bunch of empty hotels. First of all, I don't think the banks want to own a bunch of hotels because what are they going to do with them? And so, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of refinancing. Listen, I've been through this before. I went through this in the crash I went through this in 9/11. I was there. I was a VP running a division at that point in the company, including in Boston and New York and places. And I've seen this happen before where owners are pressed to go back and renegotiate their terms with their banks, renegotiate their terms with the franchise companies that they're involved with, lay off staff, et cetera, et cetera. I'm a little surprised that they're saying, that many, unless they just want to build the case that it is a serious problem, that if business levels don't get back, I mean, a hotel with no guests can't survive for very long. Because the unfortunate part is that one thing I learned in the hotel business, over the years when we're doing P&Ls was that, probably 40% of our expense in a hotel revolved around employees. That's just a broad stroke number. I used to do the math on this because I love playing with the P&Ls. But when you look at the P&L statements, but the problem is that debt service doesn't go down if your occupancy went from 70% to 35%. That's the problem. Your debt service is still there. Your real estate taxes are still there. Yes, you can flex your employees, and all of your monthly recurring costs that are driven off of per occupied room costs, et cetera, they're going to go down, like the cost of soap, et cetera, because you just reduce your inventories. The problem is all the other fixed costs have to be reduced as well. The biggest thing that hotel owners have to deal with, of course, is the mortgage. So I would imagine that in corporate America, the refinancing that's going on, going back to banks to say, listen, unless you want to be the happy owner of a hotel, you're going to have to work with me on my debt, just like, with people with their mortgage. The banks don't want to be the happy owner of 32,000 hotels or whatever that number was. They just don't. So.
Thank you, Arthur. Actually, a student did ask about your career. That was, I should have asked you that too.
Yeah.
About how did you start in music and get into the hospitality business?
From Miss Brooks, right?
Yeah, Miss Brooks.
Yeah. So yeah, it's funny. So I went to conservatory in New York City, and actually went to conservatories when I was even a little kid. And then when I was like 21 or so, I decided I didn't want to be a musician anymore. And so I left being a violinist and I went and got a job in a hotel company. So my first job in New York City was with Omni Hotels as a salesperson. And then I kind of worked my way up, and then, but really the thought process at the time was I had made the decision that I didn't want to be a musician. And, because I had taken, some business classes at that point, or was taking them, and I was young at that point, I ended up getting into the hotel business. And the thing I really loved about the hotel business, and I learned pretty quickly, is if you put energy into the hotel business, you can rise pretty quickly and pretty well within the hotel business without having to go to MIT. Okay. The bottom line is, this business rewards hard work and smart people. And I know I've said this, Radesh, to your class in the past. I mean, many of you on this call have a huge leg up on even what I had, because I didn't come out of a hotel career background. I came out of it with a music background. And so that's not the first time that somebody's asked me, well, how did you make the transition from music over to hotels? And obviously there's some linkage there in terms of being able to think in concepts and kind of, managing different teams or whatever that I did when I was in the music business. But, the bottom line is that the hotel industry is an industry that really allows people, I think, to do really well and can move quickly in it and rise up the ranks. And it, it's a great industry. It really is, and it doesn't require, like I said, a degree from MIT to go and become a general manager in a hotel, right? If you understand service concepts and you've got basic training in place, anybody can become a general manager or rise up through the ranks of corporate America in the hotel business. That's my opinion. So.
I think, Arthur, Ms. Brooks has a follow-up question for you.
I am in QRS and fast casual. What advice would you give me transitioning to hotel? What's QRS? Just out of curiosity, I don't know what QRS is.
It's QSR. I should have just
Quick restaurant service. Fast food
Oh,
restaurant.
okay.
Fast food restaurant.
Yeah, I was trying to type really fast.
Oh, I get it.
just should unmute myself.
Yeah, I think that, listen, I mean, in my opinion, a good employee is a good employee. I don't care if they are working in a restaurant, they're working at a restaurant, or rather a restaurant, an airline, whatever. And very honestly, we used to carry little cards when I was an operator that we would hand out to service to people in like Neiman Marcus or Nordstrom's or whatever, and say, listen, you know, I think you'd be somebody who'd be great in the hotel business. Why don't you go and talk to our HR person? Because I think you'd be the kind of person, listen, you can train people, but one of the most important things you hire in the hotel industry at a unit level is attitude, right? Because you can train people on how to check people in on a front office, a property management system. What's harder to train is somebody with a really great attitude, because attitudes don't just come overnight. They're part of that branding of an individual. So what I would say to you is make sure you reach out to hotels, use your networking. You know, one of the things that I've done over the years is tried to really help people network within the hotel industry. And I've always told people it's a contact sport, right? You know, you don't just go on H Careers and go, well, I saw a job, let me send out 50 resumes this week, because my old saying was mail you fail. You need to be engaged. You need to use your network. You need to talk to people. You need to say, who can you put me in touch with? Do you know anybody where I might be able to go? And getting a personal connection is really what works. I'll give you a great example. A great administrative executive assistant who worked for me at IHG about a month or so ago, they went through a reorg there, and she actually lost her job. And so I was reading about her on LinkedIn. So I called her up and I said, what happened? And so she explained the situation, that they had to make some changes there. And so I started sending her resume out to different people that I knew. And one of them happened to be somebody on a board. And the board member that I know knew somebody else. They sent her resume there. She ended up getting a job. And that's like 3 people removed from me, right? I don't even know the person that she ended up getting a job with. But the fact of the matter was, because I talked to her, I sent her resume to somebody. That other person who I'm on board with sent her resume to somebody else. All of a sudden, they started interacting with her, and it started opening doors. So when I say that looking for a job in any industry, including the hotel industry, is a contact sport, you got to use your network. And that means reaching out and talking to people. I mean, even last week, I had lunch with former employees of mine from my old company that said, listen, I'd love to talk to you, and I'm going through this transition, and what can you recommend? I can't tell you how honored I was that old employees reached out to me after a year to say, can I sit down and have, you know, lunch with you and have you talk to me about what I should do? So that would be my recommendation, if that makes sense. So use your network, huh? And use other people's network, more importantly. You don't need to have the network yourself. Use other people's network.
Well, thank you, Arthur. We're out of time.
Okay.
And we all thank you very much. We're giving you silent applause, my friend.
No,
Thank you, Arthur.
guys.
That was very
Thank
nice.
you.
I always enjoy your presentations. You put so much work into it. You know, you should be teaching for us. Really. You know, we'll think about that. With
Yeah.
Zoom, you could probably do that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, you let me know. But
Well,
listen, I'm
we look forward
delighted.
to.
I'm delighted to see all of you folks and talk to you. I mean, I get as much, if not more, value out of this and honor than you can imagine. So I appreciate being asked to do it, Chris.
We look forward to seeing you again here in Memphis real soon.
Yeah, please, can we do that?
Yes,
For
sir.
our springboard meeting.